Hello, hello, and welcome back to another awesome conversation that we're going to have as part of our inaugural Parent Tween Foundation Empower-thon. If you don't know Parent Tween Foundation or Parent Tween Connection, I'm Clarissa. I'm actually the founder of this entire beast of Parent Tween Connection, where we connect parents to each other and to the professionals who can help them support their kids. And the Parent Tween Foundation fits right in the middle there by helping to bridge the financial gap that often exists. In fact, too often exists between families and the resources that can help them. So with the Empower-thon, we are bringing an array of professionals to you, including Scotti Weintraub. Did I say that right?
You did.
Woo! Excellent. I meant to double check that with you. But Scotti is the founder of Reframe Parenting. And her whole point is that if we reframe the way that we look at things, we can gather different perspectives on them. So first of all, Scotti, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your knowledge, and for supporting the foundation. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me, Clarissa. And I just want to thank you for the work you're doing, because I know all too well how difficult it is to find the resources you need, and then to be able to access them is a whole nother barrier.
Absolutely. And so I know you and I have chatted. I know that you came to what you do as a support for parents from your own school of hard knocks, as it were, navigating some challenges with your own kiddo and going, they're struggling and things feel really hard, but I don't know what's going on. I don't know where to go to get the help that I need. And it just kind of like gradually went from there. And you really focus in on supporting families and figuring out how to get the help they need when the kids are struggling in school, right?
Yes. So I feel like there's a big gap for families who start realizing something's happening for their child at school, that they don't know quite even sometimes what that struggle is or what's behind the struggle and what even to do about it. How can they get involved? And so my goal is to empower parents, give them information, resources, and support to help them become an advocate and move their family forward towards success.
I love it. So, I've been an SAT and ACT coach for 25 years, and I've worked with an array of families at toward the later years of their teenage experience. And many of them are just like gunners, or like the parents are gunners and they're pushing their kids in ways that maybe the kids don't want to be challenged. But then there are definitely kids who just struggle with testing, or they struggle, as you said, with your own kiddo, with whatever it is that they're dealing with in school. And sometimes there's this, what I have observed is kind of like a parents wearing their kids' accomplishments as like badges of honor.
Yes.
And so I've also seen the other side, where when the kids struggle, the parents somehow feel like they're to blame.
It's such a tricky space to be in, honestly. It's when your child is struggling in school, it can feel a lot like it's your problem, that you created it as through your parenting. And I think our culture gives us messages that feed that. And especially, I would say, even with social media, where we see all of these images of, other people's kids having these high achievements or doing these amazing things, and our child is struggling, it can really impact parents in a negative way.
So one of the points that I know that is really important to you to make to families, or with families, with parents, is that as the adults in the family, the adults are not the kids.
Yes. We are not our kids. And that's a pretty obvious statement to say, right?
We'd like to think so anyway,
but if we really think about it, our own experiences as kids, even, or as students, are not the same as what our kids' experiences are, or what their academic experience is. And similarly, our strengths and weaknesses are not what our kids' strengths or weaknesses are. So if we get trapped in the thinking of, well, I could do that, why can't my child? Then we're missing an opportunity to see what is actually happening for them, how their brain works, what their unique challenges and accomplishments and abilities are. And so I think that it can be a tricky place to be stuck.
Right.
For instance, I'll say I was always a really good student.
Right.
And I could turn all of my homework in on time or early. That was never an issue for me. But my own kids really struggle with that. And so if I get too trapped in thinking, well, I don't understand why they can't. I turned it in. I could be that student. Then I'm not saying, well, why aren't they able to turn in their homework on time?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think looking at it like that, instead of going like, why didn't you? It's why couldn't you, almost, right? Like,
yes, that's part of the reframing is
right.
around rethinking how we see our kids' challenges. So if we can see them in a different light and see them as, well, what is really happening here?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just focusing on the end thing, which is they didn't turn in their homework in the scenario, but really backing up from there and saying, okay, why was it that they didn't turn in their homework? Were they distracted? Do they have a hard time with deadlines? Do they need, more structure around getting the work done in a timely fashion to get it in on time? It's an opportunity to look at everything that's going on that gets you to that end instead of just saying, why didn't you turn that in?
So that just made me think of a conversation I had with a mom a couple of years ago, actually, who unfortunately lost one of her kiddos to his own hand, or by his own hand. And sometime later, I don't remember the exact time frame. I think he was 14 when he died, and one of his older siblings was in a pretty rigorous math class. And this was a kiddo who had always been really good in math. And all of a sudden, it was just like, it was off a ledge. And it wasn't like a close enough proximity to his brother's passing that it was an obvious connection. But, mom went in, she was trying to, help with it, between the mom and the teacher, craft a plan that, like you're saying, like, do we need more supports, this, that, or the other thing along the way? And longer story shorter, what ultimately came out was that the kiddo said that in one or two particular classes, if I'm remembering it correctly, early in the year, in a couple of the class sessions, they covered some stuff that he just could not focus on. He was in a grief period, like a more intensive grief. Any of us who've navigated it, we know that it's not linear. And so he had just dropped into one of those spaces, didn't learn the concepts that they taught in those however many sessions. And then, of course, in math, especially higher level math, everything builds on top of one thing builds on top of the next, on top of the next, that he literally didn't have the mathematical understanding to do the homework. But the mom never considered that because he'd always been really strong in math. And again, there was enough removed from the trauma of his brother's death that she just didn't put two and two together. So I like the way that you're looking at it, of like getting curious. I know the next comment that you wanted is like, curiosity is actually your friend.
Oh,
and going 100%. Like, what else is going on? What else is going on?
And my favorite phrase for this is I wonder. So I wonder, because it's less loaded, right? It doesn't, it lends itself to, more airy quality and not a really heavy quality when you're talking about it. I wonder what was going on when he started having a hard time in math class. I wonder what that might be about.
Right.
So if we can use that curiosity to dig a little deeper, we're doing everybody a favor. Right? We're not focusing on the shortcomings. We're focusing on how can we actually support the student.
Right. Well, and I think of like, how many times have you been in a business building brainstorming situation or something where you take like the big pads of sticky paper, right? And you put a piece on the wall, and it's like, there are no bad ideas. Go put all the ideas about how we can achieve X on the paper. And then we'll get rid of ones that don't make as much sense as we go. Like, I almost feel like that's kind of like, I wonder, right? Like, what are all the possible things that I could come up with? Like, maybe he was abducted by aliens.
Well,
not likely.
Unlikely, but
maybe, right? And so I think, how like wild and crazy can we go thinking about like all the different possibilities? Because then when we start eliminating them, it brings us closer to what is more likely, at least.
Right. And I think especially with teens as they get older, they're less likely to express their inner feelings with their parents.
Sure.
At
Yep.
least I certainly find that in my family.
Hmm.
And so doing that investigating might take a little bit more effort and some more conversations because they might not be as forthcoming with just
Right.
saying, "Well, I didn't understand something." Or maybe it's also that they don't understand why they're having a hard time either, right?
Sure.
They may need a little coaching, and some structure around, "Let's think about when that happened, how did that make you feel?"
Hmm.
Or, "When that happened, I wonder if there was something that you didn't quite understand," and helping them help you do that
Right.
investigative.
Well, and to your point of, I wonder, having a bit of an airier quality, right? A
Mhm.
more open, air of possibilities
Yes.
quality to it, right? What comes up from my in my thinking is that as we get curious and we're engaging with the teens that we're supporting, I think it's important that we keep in mind that we need to not be like interrogating them. Like, this isn't like they've been
No,
arrested and it's like, getting just
no,
drilled with questions, because
absolutely
that's a
not.
possibility, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and I am definitely not advocating to bombard your "What is going on?" That is not my suggestion.
Well, but
My
it's easy
suggestion
to go
is
there.
open. Yes, it is super easy to go there, especially when you're frustrated as a parent.
Exactly.
But if we take a step back, take a few deep breaths first, and then engage them in thinking about how you can best support them. If they feel like the conversation is open to suggestion, is not about placing blame or
Hmm.
criticizing,
Hmm.
then they're much more likely, because I honestly believe that all kids want to do well, that
Yeah.
all students want to succeed.
Hmm.
So if we frame our conversations with them in a way that allows for them to do that some of that brainstorming with us,
Hmm.
and it might not all happen at once. I don't know how open my teen would be to the white paper. It's like
Right. Right. Right.
brainstorming, but if sometimes I think it's just a matter of saying, like, "I'm really wondering why why this particular thing is a challenge and how I might be able to support you. And if now's not the right time to talk about it, then we come back to it another time too."
Hmm.
But it doesn't have to be it's not about fixing everything right this moment.
Hmm. Scotty, one of the things that I love about what I do at Parent Tween Connection is that I get to meet so many really cool professionals who have specialties like you do, right? In this case, in the academic arena, and some folks are more, in the mental health space
Sure.
or in the physical health space or whatever, or like straight up parent coaching. But so many of the underlying concepts that I hear on a regular basis include curiosity. So when I saw that in your notes, I was like, oh, yep, there we go. She's right in line with us. I love it. um, but also really working to maintain this team aspect with our kiddos and doing everything that we can to not make it confrontational, right? Like, I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you, not to make you bad, right?
Or to
And
shame you.
or to shame you, right? And because you're not broken, there's nothing that needs to be fixed. There's a struggle, but we can figure out how to navigate that. um but also agency, right? Like, their participation in the process, which is obviously going to vary from like a 6-year-old to an eight,
Oh, of
10,
course.
whatever. But having them even get curious, right? And so, like, what kinds of questions would you encourage a kiddo to ask of themselves? I know you had some
Mhm.
already of like, okay, I'm wondering what it felt like in your body. Or, what are some things that a student could use, or that a parent can offer to a student for
Right.
self-reflection, um, to observe what's going on for them when they're struggling.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I did mention one earlier around feeling because I think, and we talk about this in my house too, that sometimes we don't know quite what our emotions are.
Hmm.
And I think that's a huge thing that kids learn as they age. And some adults are perhaps not that great at it either, right? Yes. So learning to identify, that's a great book.
Man,
Learning to
fabulous book.
Yes, learning to identify what feelings you're having in certain settings, I think can be really insightful. But in terms of more, sort of specifics, I think just asking them, well, let's go backwards in time. When did you start feeling that struggle? When was the first time that this whatever this
Whatever this
math
is.
problem is? When did that first start happening for you? And maybe that is a little bit of an insight into, well, it happens. Does it happen every day? Are there certain times of the day when this happens more for you? Um, is it after lunch? I know some kids still need to move their bodies, they get wiggly.
Mhm.
Um, is it that every day for a teenager in particular, first period is just a challenge because they are not awake? So if we can
Mhm.
help them ask questions about timeline, about how they're feeling, about doing that investigative work, I think those are really good skills that hopefully will carry into their adulthood
Sure.
because they're good skills for me to think about, right? Like
Absolutely agree.
when something isn't going right, can I reverse engineer it?
Mhm.
And helping them with those kinds of discovery questions, I think is just a really good life skill.
Absolutely. That's why I was curious if you could add that in, because it's not just about us. Like you said, it's not just the adult's problem. It's not just the kid's problem or
No.
challenge, right? It's both, and there's some things, like when I do a consultation or some such with a kiddo, or like I'm talking SAT or ACT, like mom and dad can give me some insight, but really I need to talk to the kiddo to get a sense of what's going on in their head as much as possible. So
Right,
I
and
think
I think that our one of our end goals is certainly to give the kids information and resources enough so that they can start advocating for themselves.
correct.
And I
Yes.
think sometimes we too often assume that kids should, I don't like that word very much, but they should be just asking for help. Why are they not doing that, right? But maybe they need a little more support in knowing even how to do that.
Hmm.
How do you ask for support? How
Hmm.
do you find the resources to get a tutor after school or find out when your teacher's open office hours are to ask them a
Hmm.
question. These are
Hmm.
not things that people intuitively know sometimes. And so, like, helping them think through, okay, well, what are the resources in your school?
Hmm.
Can we ask, who could you ask that question of?
Hmm.
And then that's giving them those skills that hopefully will lead them to start doing some of that self-advocacy work that is what we all want for our kids.
Absolutely. So, one of the other conversations we had this week with Michelle Slaney Trovato, she talked about how to become an ally with your kid's school, specifically we're supporting families with kids who are in the special needs arena.
Mhm.
And her kiddo, her older kiddo is functionally nonverbal. So she's had to do this at a pretty high level for her
Yeah.
kiddo. But her younger one, she was saying has some real serious qualms about raising his hand to ask questions in class. Like it's just not going to happen. And so he and his teacher devised a plan where he could take his eraser and put it on the corner of his desk. And that was like his little signal
I
that
love that.
he needed help, right? That way, when the teacher was milling about the room, she didn't even ask, "Do you have a question?" Like that had already been answered by virtue
Mhm.
of him putting his eraser in that place on the desk. And it was just like, okay, what's the question?
Right.
And
And
so,
that's such a wonderful example because not only is the student able to have agency, to feel confident in asking the question in a way that feels safe,
mhm,
and the teacher feels confident in knowing they can meet the needs of that student in a way
mhm,
that helps him feel safe.
absolutely.
So it's just such a lovely example. I love it.
And that's why I wanted to mention it because I knew you'd love it, but also because I want folks to go listen to Michelle's conversation as
Yes.
well because I think it melds perfectly with what we're talking about here. Um, Talk to me about your perspective on how our growth as the adults Ow, as my dog just kicked me. If you saw me just jump, that's why. How is it that our growth as the adults in the world impacts our kids? And what do you
Oh,
mean by like the more we grow?
the more we grow, I think that it impacts our kids tremendously. I think a lot of people are hesitant to think about this piece of it because we're the adults, right? We're in charge.
Okay.
And it's not something for me to do, it's for them. But
Mhm.
I think the more we can think through our own challenges and needs and identify them, I mean, the better it is for us personally, but it also allows us to do that reframing, to think about our children in slightly different ways.
Mhm.
So we can move from confusion to, okay, I'm working with my child to help them figure this out. I can move from understanding or from frustration rather to understanding. So
Okay.
it helps us not get stuck in all those negative emotions that don't feel good, right?
Mhm.
So no one wants to be frustrated for a long period of time. I don't.
Correct.
And so if we can, I won't use that using that curiosity, see our child for who they really are.
Mhm.
And in order to do that, sometimes we need information.
Mhm.
Sometimes we need diagnoses, not all the time. Sometimes that's an important piece.
Mhm.
Information, resources, sometimes we need providers, sometimes we need to work with the teachers. There could be a range of things that we need to do that. But the more we do that work ourselves to kind of figure all those pieces out, the more we can see them
Mhm.
as complex, funny, charming, loving people, human beings
Yep.
that also have these challenges. And I think it breeds compassion.
So I'm going to go out on a ledge here and I'm going to ask you, do you think that people perceive, okay, so I'm going to back up and I'm going to say, like, okay, dyslexia, for example,
Mhm.
right? Like that is a misfiring of something somehow in the brain,
Yes.
right? Or ADHD or all the things, right? Like on
Mhm.
on a mental health perspective or the academic perspective of functionally, right? Just like however tall you end up being is just part of your genetic coding, right? And that's just
Mhm.
who and what you are. Do you think from what you've seen, I'm guessing you have seen that parents look at academic challenges differently than they look at, like, hey, you've got brown hair. Wish you would have been blonde, right? Like, because of that, going back to the idea of like somehow it seems like there's a reflection on how they have
Mhm.
parented. Like, you
Yes.
got brown hair. That was just luck of the draw. Good luck,
Right.
kid, right? As opposed to, oh, you're struggling in
Mhm.
school. There's something that I did to impact that.
Or even if parents don't, and I do think that they sometimes take that on, internalize it as, "Oh, I did something." But I do believe that the more you understand about these things, whatever that challenge is that your child has, dyslexia, for instance, the more you understand, "Oh, this isn't about them trying harder."
Hmm.
This is actually how their brain works, and that is liberating. To If you can embrace that this is just a difference that exists in our genetic pools, that,
Hmm.
okay, then that isn't a value judgment. That is a brain difference,
Hmm.
and that, I think, lends itself to, that lightening of the parental guilt
Hmm.
or shame.
Hmm.
And, one of the other points I wanted to make today is just really that our kids' struggles are not a reflection of our parenting,
Right.
right? So a child who struggles with dyslexia, for instance, that is not a reflection on what you did or didn't do as a parent.
Hmm.
I think if you see that as not your own fault, then
Hmm.
you're able to have compassion for yourself
Hmm.
and compassion for your child.
Hmm.
And good parents have kids who struggle.
Yeah,
It just
absolutely.
it is, and I think the more we talk about it, which is why I'm always talking about it,
Absolutely. Yep.
the more we talk about it, the more we can normalize that kids struggle people struggle. It's part of
Mhm.
our being human
Mhm.
that we can normalize having those conversations with other parents so that we
Mhm.
don't feel so isolated. Because I do think that parents, when their kids struggle at school, can feel very, very isolated.
Oh, absolutely. Because, well, and especially as we get into the teenage years, number one, they don't necessarily want to share with their own friends out of fear of judgment if they have the judgment of themselves as to whether they're, good parents or not. But they also are, from my experience, I've seen that we're trying to honor our kids' confidentiality more.
Yes.
And we don't necessarily want to be going and talking about things with people who might judge my kid. Like, it's one thing if you judge me, but don't judge my family kind of deal, right?
Mhm.
And so there's like a double, sometimes triple or more layer of why folks feel so isolated because they feel like they don't have that safe place to chat. So,
Right, and I think too, as they age, you're just in less communication with other parents on a
mhm,
regular
absolutely.
basis, right?
Correct. Yes.
When your kids are younger, you're communicating with your child's friends, parents.
Mhm.
That's just
You have to.
part of what happens, right? But as they get older, they take on all those communications, and you're not setting up play dates and even with school, I think sometimes it gets tricky because the child is expected to do way more of all that communication with teachers. And
Hmm.
some kids are just not ready
Hmm.
to do that in a really effective way. That doesn't
Hmm.
mean they're not going to get there. As I was mentioning earlier about advocating that, our goal is to provide enough structure to get them there, but if they're not there yet, that's okay too.
Hmm. And that right there is in line with some of the other conversations that we've had. So I love that you said that because, again, we're getting consistent messaging, even if it's more specific
Yes.
arenas. So overall, we are not our kids. Our
Mhm.
kids' struggles or successes, if I might add,
Yep,
are
I think
not a
that's true.
reflection of our parenting, right? You think that's a fair statement to put in there?
I think it is. I mean, I think that that's a difficult one for people to sometimes embrace, but yes.
Well, because they had to put something into it. Okay, it's not exclusively a reflection of the parenting. How's that?
Right. And we've as parents, we work really, really hard. All those years of sleepless nights, of shuttling kids in the car, of worry,
Hmm.
we want it to pay off. And
100%.
I think even when your child is struggling, it is paying off. All
It
of that
is.
is paying off. It's
Hmm.
just not paying off in the way you think it might be at the current moment.
Right. Or the way you might like it to be.
Well, yes.
Right. Right. So then get curious both about
Mhm.
your kiddo and with your kiddo, is what I
Yes.
understood.
Mhm.
And keep focusing on your own growth and your own exploration and your own learning. Because the more we learn and the more we know, the better we can advocate for and support our kids.
Yes, and the more we can see them as complicated humans, I think it's
You mean they got stuck being complicated too? I passed that on to them.
unfortunately, yes. Wouldn't it be great if we could just magically erase that part? But we can't.
Yeah. Well, luckily for whatever beings might have gotten it from me, I don't actually have children, so they don't have to deal with my variation of complicated. But anyway, Scotty, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you and your knowledge and sharing with us. Um, and for folks who are listening in, we do have a little friendly contest going on among our speakers and our participants in Empowerthon. In that, by virtue of encouraging them to share about Empowerthon with others and help us to raise the money to launch Parent Tween Foundation, we're offering for our fundraising guest speaker. It's a new word. I coined it myself.
I like it.
Whichever speaker helps us to raise the most in funds individually, we're going to take 20% of what they help us generate and donate to a nonprofit of their choice that supports kids and families. And so you had indicated, is it an entity called understood.org? I've
Yes.
never heard of them. Can you give them
Oh,
a plug?
you need to go to their website.
Okay.
Understood.org is a fabulous resource for parents. It includes all sorts of information around neurodiversity, around learning disabilities, and does it in ways that are super easy to understand. It's just a tremendous resource. And
Awesome.
it I'm glad it exists because I send people there all the time.
Good. I will have to go check them out, and maybe there's a way that we can collaborate with them.
I think that'd be great.
Awesome. All right. Well, if any of you want to get more information from Scotti about some of the supports that she can offer, all of her information is on all of the descriptions in all the places where we're recording right now or where we're streaming, as is her donation link. So if you got some information out of this or you had an aha moment, would you say thank you by making a donation, even if it's like $5, $5 and $5 and $5 adds up over time. So Scotti, thank you. Anyone listening, thank you. I appreciate all of you, and I'm just thrilled that you were able to join us.
Well, thanks so much for having me and participating in this really needed project. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Over and out, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.